Hey everyone. Wow, okay. I initially thought I was responding to the Radical Reviewer as a follow-up to my last non-compete video, but this just came out of left field. I stumbled upon this channel and I absolutely had to make a video on it. You live to see another day, you beautiful spurg, you. Meet Pauladice, progressive YouTuber who, on the surface, appears to be relatively average in shit-tier normie politics, social justice apologetics, Keynesian economic fallacies, orange man bad, the typical material you'd expect from someone like this. But if you actually watch these videos, holy fucking shit. This guy is a goddamn petri dish of learning disabilities. I could really respond to every video on his channel because even his responses to people like PragerU or Ben Shapiro, who I fucking hate both of, are downright aspergic, which really should tell you something. But just to put into perspective how little research is put into these videos and how much of a mental midget our host is, he made a video attempting to refute the Economic Freedom Index, in which he attempts to argue that prosperity is based off of geological location, a functioning government, political affiliations, a creative culture, and political stability. The first and fourth points on here are too vague to be counted in as factors since they don't describe any specific social traits, and arguably the first point, depending on what Pauladice intended, could be the opposite of reality as regulations create artificial scarcity and increase the cost of producing commodities, resulting in higher market prices and fewer available jobs on the white markets with a devalued currency. The third and fifth points argue in favor of economic freedom being the determining factor behind what makes a society wealthy, which, as you'll see later in this video, is a recurring theme with our potato of a host. And the second point is completely irrelevant, as evidenced by simply looking at the Economic Freedom Index. Number 1 and 2 on this list are giant elephants in the room, or in this case, should I say, rocks with shit soil and little to no natural resources, surrounded by nothing but totalitarian shithole countries with little to no economic freedom and oceans. Despite this, the countries in question have the most prosperous economies and populations in the world. Now, the reason that I separate economies from population is because apparently our host seems to think that economic freedom and prosperity does not correlate with a prosperous population, which for one is demonstrably wrong in every single observable metric, but also what an economy is simply an attempt to study human actors and how they associate with one another within a market. I mean, I've heard this argument from Kyle Kulinski as well, and it seems to be a sort of last grasp that pseudo-intellectual progressives and Keynesians cling on to when they have no points to show that their economic ideas are viable. It's ridiculous because the study of markets and the economy is the study of people. So a prosperous economy is a prosperous society, and the two therefore necessarily cannot be separated. To claim that you can have a prosperous market with a poor population is like arguing that you can have a restaurant without serving food. But his biggest doozy, one which is so bad I've singled it out over all of his others, is his response to Freedom Tunes, where he attempts to argue against the subjectivity of value. So this ought to be interesting. I mean, opponents to marginalism have been trying to argue against it with no success for the last 140 years from all over the world, but who knows? Maybe he'll be the one...
Here it is, the promised libertarian video. Sorry for the delay, but I wanted to respond to that PragerU video, and as you all know, I despise PragerU for many, many reasons. Mostly the rampant misinformation, but another thing that really gets under my skin is that they try to frame their political activism as an educational resource. Indeed, all of their videos are categorized as education, even their most brazenly partisan videos that don't even try to be educational. But they're not alone. There's also the Foundation for Economic Education. But while PragerU is a conservative mouthpiece funded by the Wilks brothers, FEE is a libertarian mouthpiece funded by the Koch brothers.
Actually, no. Fee doesn't claim to have any explicit political leaning, unlike PragerU, which explicitly identifies as American conservative. Rather, Fee identifies with a set of principles. These principles may be indicative of a certain set of political leanings, but themselves do not have a political nature. Also, the source which you provided, sourcewatch.org, lists 3 citations for this claim, one of which is a link to the Charles Koch Institute's website that does not list the Foundation for Economic Education as a media partner, a PDF listing some shitlib political propaganda pamphlets which don't have any citations for any of their claims, and the About section of the Foundation for Economic Education's website, which links to their tax returns that they've publicly listed for anyone to read. Well, out of curiosity, I read Fee's tax returns, and not only does it not list anywhere that the Koch brothers or tied organizations donated to them, but also not a single cent of their annual income was spent lobbying or on legal expenses. So even from your provided source, I was not able to find any evidence of this claim, or that they're a political interest group. But hypothetically speaking, even if this were true, this would not have any bearing on the factual accuracy of the information which is being presented here, and since the Koch brothers are on record funding the expansion of regulation of many industries, the farming industry being the most prevalent of recent examples, and a study which supported government expansion of healthcare, does that mean that those are all invalid as well? And also, why would they be funding a free market think tank? There's a reason that there is such a long documented history of big corporations lobbying for increasing regulations, the Koch industries being no exception. This is because regulations kill smaller competitors and allow bigger entities to operate without having to compete. Conservatives openly support protectionist regulations such as tariffs and have done nothing to stop the state from expanding its influence over the market, as one can easily see by checking the Federal Register. So that's why corporatists are equally as attracted to Republicans as they are Democrats. The Republican and Democrat parties both have the exact same influence over society by effect of their policies, which is unsurprising when you actually think about the political system and realize that both Democrats and Republicans are operated by the same entity, the state, and therefore necessarily have the same interest. Or to put it simply, it doesn't really matter which political party you associate corporatists like the Koch brothers with, because at the end of the day, both parties are identical, and what motivates the corporatists is not some vague political allegiance, but how the bills in question affect their industries.
More specifically, they promote the Austrian School of Economics, which makes it all the more hilarious they call themselves the Foundation for Economic Education, since Austrian economics is not within the scope of modern mainstream economics.
Yes, because being taught as the established point of view in a state-run institution is really the basis for what makes a school of economic thought valid. This is hilarious both because state education operates under a structure known as the Prussian model, which was deliberately designed to destroy independent thought and instill obedience into the students, which is quite literally about as unscientific as it gets, leading me to my second point, which is that the study of markets cannot have any authorities, and deeming economic ideas to be legitimate or illegitimate based solely on who argues them is the logical fallacy of appealing to authority.
Mainstream economics includes Keynesians to the left, and to the right there are the monetarists and supply-siders, but
aside from the fact that the right-left dichotomy is meaningless and arbitrary, as those terms don't describe any specific philosophical principles while applying to a very broad set of beliefs, the study of markets is simply an observation of human actors, and therefore schools of thought themselves don't carry any political conclusions. For the record, Austrians and monetarists agree on almost everything with the exception of interest rates and their theories on money and credit, which monetarists argue that credit is based on statistical correlation between central banking money supply and national income, whereas Austrians argue that credit is redeemable on demand, which can only be observed on an individual basis. So what exactly is it that makes Austrian economics invalid, but monetarist theory valid? said, that Austrian theory tends to reject central banking. I mean, this video is attempting to debunk the argument that commodity value is subjective, so it would only make sense that mentioning this point in this video would only be done if it was relevant to the discussion. You realize that the Austrians are not the only economists that utilize marginal utility in their proposals, right? One of the other schools being monetarists, which you yourself have identified as being mainstream, and schools which utilize cost theory of value, such as Keynesians or neoclassical economists, all have to deal with an issue first pointed out by Adam Smith and David Ricardo, known as the paradox of value, which Smith and Ricardo both consequently acknowledged that cost theory of value was incomplete, as there were still variables that it didn't take into consideration. For example, water is more expensive during a drought than during a raining season, and cost theory of value was incapable of calculating this. Carl Menger in 1871 solved the paradox of value by introducing the theory of marginal utility, or simply, the price of a good is relative to the value an individual would receive out of the next unit produced. So effectively, the subjective theory of value is cost theory of value after solving the paradox of value, something that cost theorists still struggle with today.
Monetarists and supply-siders still accept the basic precepts of modern economics. Austrians do not.
Well, for one thing, supply-sider is not a school of economic thought. Supply-side economics is a government policy which seeks to increase economic productivity by reducing the amount of regulations on the economy and lowering taxes. And as I've gone over, monetarists and Austrians agree on 90% if not more of their formulations, but use a different methodology to achieve their conclusions, including subjective theory of value. This really just goes to show how little this buffoon knows about the subjects in question.
And what I find completely baffling about their supporters is that, in my experience, they are so sure of themselves that they will denounce mainstream economics as fake economics. There are people who will say that somebody like Paul Krugman, who has a PhD in economics, teaches economics, has written economics textbooks, and has won a Nobel Prize in economics, does not understand economics.
I am not even kidding. The first time I heard that, I had to stop recording this video because I couldn't stop laughing for like an hour. I mean, I don't even know where to fucking begin. Paul Krugman. Paul fucking Krugman, of all people, is your example. This man has gotten so many things wrong that the only way you could take him even remotely seriously is if you just look at his credentials and appeal to his proclaimed authority on the subject. And he doesn't even get things wrong. He provides the most hilarious hot takes of any mainstream figure next to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This is the guy who argued in 1998 that by 2005, the internet would have, quote, an impact no greater than the fax machines. He credited Nazi Germany for starting the fucking Holocaust as being the factor which ended the Great Depression. He argued that the way to end the dot-com bubble was for the Federal Reserve to create a bubble in the housing market through artificially manipulating interest rates. Then he had the fucking audacity to claim that he predicted the recession of 2008. It's not just Austrians who pan this guy. It's pretty much anybody who has even a halfway decent grasp on basic economic concepts. This man is a joke. Also, there's no such thing as a Nobel Prize in Economics. The actual award is known as the Sveriges Riksbank Prize in Economic Sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel, which is not actually a Nobel Prize as it's issued by the Central Bank of Sweden, which for the record, Austrian economists have received this award in the past, such as Friedrich Hayek in 1974, but he declined it, arguing that it's dangerous to create an artificial authority around a subject like economics, mainly because he foresaw that morons like Paul Krugman could just buy one, and idiots like Paulidice would start listening to his nonsense.
We are talking about people, most of whom probably couldn't even tell you how GDP is calculated.
Oh, we know full well how it works. It's just that GDP as a framework for measuring economic growth gives the impression that it's not the activities of individuals that produce goods and services, but that the economy is a separate entity from the people who trade within it. The problem is that by itself, it lumps the values of final goods and services together. The GDP framework cannot tell us whether final goods and services that were produced during a particular period of time are a reflection of real wealth expansion or a reflection of capital consumption, which is why, for example, in 1989, an economics textbook based on Keynesian theory written by Paul Samuelson argued that the current state of the Soviet Union proved that command economies were a viable model because the USSR had a high GDP. The problem is that no actual growth was occurring because no one was producing any new resources. You could have an entire country where everyone living there does nothing but dig holes and fill them up again all day as their job, and have one of the highest GDP per capitas in the world, but you don't really have a prosperous economy, and that's precisely why mainstream economists are so in love with this figure. It creates the false notion that the state is needed for economic development by implication,
insisting that they know more than actual experts because they know a few Austrian talking points.
Mainstream leftists accusing Austrians of resorting to political rhetoric to get their economic ideas across is pure projection.
So, what is Austrian economics? It's basically a holdover from the 19th century.
A holdover from the 19th century. You say that as if Austrian economists haven't successfully predicted every single market crash since 1921 and the devaluation of the US dollar. A reputation which is particularly impressive given that Austrians don't even believe that one can make formal predictions about a market.
It rejects key aspects of modern economics like statistical analysis, mathematical models, and basically all of macroeconomics, instead choosing to frame everything in terms of the individual and individual decisions. So, you can see why this isn't taught much in economics classrooms, and is instead reserved for far-right think tanks.
Because government-funded institutions are not going to teach people things which run contrary to their interests?
Austrians argue that individuals are, by definition, best at maximizing their own utility, and so every exchange must be mutually beneficial, and anything that gets in the way of these free exchanges, like a tax or regulation, by definition, reduces prosperity. So it's basically alternative economics for libertarians and anarcho-capitalists.
I don't know what it is. Maybe the sanctimonious inflection his voice carries as if he thinks that what he's presenting is hot shit and that no one will be able to refute it. But whatever it is, it's starting to irritate me.
And one of the conclusions that you come to from this free market is always right mentality is, why nothing is overpriced? That's right, the good folks over at Fee are here to defend price gouging.
No, I know what it is. It's that every time he introduces a topic, he has to poison the well with a snuck assertion, baselessly projecting his own beliefs onto the subject in question, while he has that smug tone in his voice.
Hey, it's Freedom Tunes.
Yeah, I call this one VCR with a butter knife stuck in it. Brilliant.
Visionary.
I must have it. Name your price. I don't know, I guess like $13 trillion or something.
Yes, I'll give you 4 trillion.
How dare you insult me? No deal. I'll pay the asking price.
13 trillion? That trash isn't worth 13 trillion.
You're right. 14 trillion.
What? No! Don't do that, it's worthless.
Mind your business, lady. Actually,
Huh?
If you think about it, things are really just worth whatever price the buyer and seller agree on. If either of them thinks the price is wrong, they can walk away.
So, I shit you not, Pauladice plays an entire segment of the show Adam Ruins Everything at this point in the video, which is so long that not even including the quarter of the video that his introduction explaining the subject took up, it takes up half of the response. Even fucking funnier, the segment in question is making the exact same argument that Seamus made. Adam simply phrased it differently.
you're looking at a massive price fixing scheme. The prices are high because a small group of galleries and collectors decided it was good. And once they do that, the price goes up, whether or not anyone else agrees. At the end of the day, this is what the fine art market is. A few rich people passing money around.
Really? You mean that some people are willing to pay large amounts of money for things which others may not pay anything for? What's that called when the value of a product changes subjectively depending on the person?
Yeah, anyone care to argue that that's all free and fair market pricing and in no way overpriced?
Yes. Also, the term you're looking for is the sunk cost fallacy, and the sunk cost fallacy occurs because human actors facing an increasingly negative outcome from a decision or investment they made don't want to alter their course of action because they know the moment they do, they'll be faced with the cost they've sunk, something which could literally only happen if value was subjective and economic decisions were motivated by human actions, such as irrational emotional responses. I mean, how would auctions even occur if value was intrinsic? I think the fact that it's even possible to bid on a product shows that value is subjective, because if it wasn't, the entire point of auctioning would be gone, since every product would just have an objective value. Everyone would know by default what the price of the product in question is, and everyone who wanted it would just bid automatically to that amount. But then the fact that there are people who would bid and some who don't want the product even though they have enough money, again, proves that value is subjective. I mean, art galleries are probably the greatest example that anyone can provide in order to refute any sort of intrinsic value arguments. Paint and a canvas don't cost that much, so there goes cost theory of value. It's not that difficult to paint, so there goes labor theory of value. And on top of that, art tends to fluctuate significantly in price depending on the artist who created it. This guy is making full potato arguments like Paul Krugman being a decent economist because of credentials, constantly shooting himself in the foot in every video of every argument that he makes. Then he thinks he can refute something no economist has been able to refute for 140 years on the basis that it rejects mainstream economics, which isn't even true. I think it goes without saying, but this guy is a fucking retard.
That's ridiculous.
Not really. Economic value is entirely subjective.
That's true, but it doesn't mean that the price is always right. Where producer surplus equals consumer surplus. Surplus meaning the amount that you're willing to pay minus the cost. The consumer being the buyer and the producer being the seller.
Yeah, and who determines what the consumer is willing to pay?
Under the right circumstances of competitiveness, openness, and price elasticity, the market will naturally reach that equilibrium because if consumer surplus is higher than producer surplus, then the price will go up. And if producer surplus is higher than consumer surplus, i.e. if it's overpriced, then they'll just buy something else. But that's not usually the real world, especially when it comes to, I don't know, a life-saving drug. Instead of charging at a fair market price, you can charge people at their willingness to pay, because if they don't buy it, then they'll die.
And that could only happen if you have a patent, and copyright law is not a product of the market, rather a construct of the state designed to control who does and doesn't produce in specific industries.
In this case, all or most of that total surplus goes to the producer. This is not an economically efficient exchange, it is overpriced. But supporters of the Austrian school don't believe in these graphs. They believe in methodical individualism, so that's not price gouging, that's a beautiful, mutually beneficial exchange.
No, that's the state creating artificial monopolies, not something that Austrians tend to be a big fan of.
The producer valued the money more than the drug, and the consumer valued their life more than the money. In fact, everyone who bought that drug, their lives were saved by Martin Scarelli, so who are you to get in the way of this beautiful voluntary exchange? Basically, Stalin. Now, of course, not all of them will make this argument. Usually they'll just shift the blame and say that this would never happen in a real free market. But that's not the argument that Fee and others are making. They're arguing that, by definition, nothing is overpriced, and they will argue that even in situations where someone's life is on the line.
Alright, so I'm done here. In conclusion, Pauladice is your garden variety authoritarian, conceding multiple times effectively that all value is subjective, but unable to wrap his mind around this because he only sees the world through his point of view, and any point of view which doesn't conform to his is the incorrect one. A very narcissistic way of evaluating things, truly. So before I go, as you may be able to see, I recently hit 2,000 subscribers. I had more on my first channel, but thank you all so much, and to show my gratitude, on Monday, 8 p.m. Pacific, I will be hosting a live Q&A stream where we can just talk and have a good time. Alright, I will see you all later.